Ernest Hemingway said this is a book which, no matter how many readers it will have never have enough. Better than food, man. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm kind of sad. It was like thunder and lightning for a couple hours this morning, just like pouring down rain. That's the thing I love about Florida. You get these outrageous storms. Yeah. How you guys doing? Good to see you. Got one bookshelf up. Progress. Today is The Unquiet Grave by the English book reviewer Cyril Connolly. Cyril Connolly is the only author I've come across on Wikipedia whose profile picture is a grave. It's a gravestone. It's not his photo. It's just it's just his grave. And I think he would have had a nice bitter laugh about that. This is not a novel, but it's more like what this author Brad Dillon describes in his new book, Essayism. He calls this an essay, an anthology, and a complaint. Joyce Carol Oates calls The Unquiet Grave a journal in perpetual metamorphosis, a lyric assemblage. Connolly, who was an English writer, calls it a word cycle, adopting the pen name Palinurus, the pilot, the helmsman of the ship of Aeneas, in reference to Virgil's Aeneid and Roman mythology. This is a book for ambitious authors or creators, maybe more for the younger ones, but really for everybody, who've realized that they failed, or have come up against some serious obstacles and need to rethink the whole thing. The confessional message of the book is you are not alone in your failures and struggles. Is it the solution to your problems? Well, probably not, but maybe it is. This was recommended by the very helpful fan Tam Vosper, and his girlfriend Claire very kindly provided a Google Doc with the translations for all the lines in the book. Very helpful and tremendously appreciated. Thank you very much to both. This is a journal from around the time Cyril Connolly turns 40. In the 1940s, in wartime. It's an amalgam of aphorisms from him and other authors, thoughts and ideas coupled with his journal entries. It's a strange conglomeration. I've not really seen anything like it. He was a book reviewer and a literary critic, so he's extremely well read and of course knows all of the geniuses. And he weaves together this sort of depressing patchwork of introspection and reflection. Not only using his own thoughts, but using the thoughts of those he admires deeply. So who do we have joining the pity party in this book? Well, you have Baudelaire, Montaigne, Flaubert, Alviers, Spinoza, Pascal, good old Lao Tzu, of course, and many more. Connolly discusses the issues with wanting to write something as powerful as stuff from Rimbaud and Baudelaire, but simultaneously not wanting to invite that kind of despair and destruction and live through that kind of pain. It's a really polarizing read, and he was a very polarizing character. It's something like, certain passages remind me of the Book of Disquiet, of course, coupled with like the tone and the really cynical humor, nihilistic humor of like Émile Cioran. Or the thing with Connolly is that while it can be bitter and aggressive, it can change immediately to something that's sort of endearing and hopeful. So I think it would be a mistake to take this in an entirely pessimistic light, like the author points out in the beginning. What does he say here? This is in the intro, written several years after the book's been published. It says, as a signal of distress from one human being to another, the unquiet grave went unanswered, but the suffering was alleviated. As a demonstration of the power of words, however, of the obsessional impetus in an aesthetic form to fulfill its destiny, the work was an object lesson. All grief once made known to the mind can be cured by the mind, the manuscript proclaimed. The human brain, once it is fully functioning, as in the making of a poem, is outside time and place and immune from sorrow. La pensée console de tout. That was the author Sean Four, who Connolly references a lot in the book. If The Unquiet Grave therefore should leave an impression of being morbid and gloomy, then its intention has not been fulfilled. So like I said, Cyril Connolly was a book reviewer and an author, and he aspired to write a great novel, but he never really did. He never accomplished that. This is how he famously starts the book. He says, the more books we read, the clearer it becomes that the true function of a writer is to produce a masterpiece and that no other task is of any consequence. Obvious though this should be, how few writers will admit it. or having drawn the conclusion will be prepared to lay aside the piece of iridescent mediocrity on which they have embarked. Writers always hope that their next book is going to be their best, and will not acknowledge that they are prevented by their present way of life from ever creating anything different. So he's famously started off saying that the goal of any artist is to create a masterpiece. He didn't create a masterpiece, and yet he's famous for saying that very thing and not living up to his own standards. And so everybody kind of comes to this very strange, circuitous conclusion with this book. Like, is it a masterpiece in itself? Some think so. I think so. Is it a masterpiece if Hemingway says it is? I think, yeah. I love this passage where he seems to succinctly capture the struggle of balancing being busy with properly prioritizing your time. We cannot think if we have no time to read, nor feel if we are emotionally exhausted, nor out of cheap material create what is permanent. We cannot coordinate what is not there. That's definitely the struggle we all face. He seemed to have known a lot of writers and run in a lot of, circles with the who's who. Like I said, he was a fan of Hemingway. Hemingway was a fan of him. His praise of Hemingway in here was really great. Hemingway is great in that, alone of living writers, he has saturated his work with the memory of physical pleasure, with sunshine and salt water, with food, wine, and making love, and the remorse, which is the shadow of that sun. I thought that was nice. I think I'm gonna come up a little bit. There we go. Not only were there people who intensely liked or disliked Connolly, but there were some who felt both attraction and repulsion simultaneously. One of them being Evelyn Waugh. You just Google Cyril's name and these really bizarre stories come up. He was a totally eccentric guy. He had all these really exotic pets like lemurs and stuff, and would kind of take them around in public, and kind of a dandy, kind of a real lover of excess and pleasure. He wrote one novel called The Rock Beach, which was not a giant success. Subsequently, he's often speaking in a tone of anxious remorse and self-pity, vulnerable and insecure not only about his literary failures, but also his physical and romantic failures. He was a big guy, so he was very concerned with losing weight, yet he couldn't stay away from all of this hedonistic pleasure. It's kind of the same thing, it's like, it's the same thing with not being able to commit to writing something, or so it seems that way, not being able to discipline yourself to get rid of the sugar and the crap food and exercise, and then also not being able to actually make the correct sacrifice to create a serious novel, something of meaning and substance. I think kind of goes like hand in hand. And also he's concerned with his romantic failures, which there was no shortage apparently in his life. For example, New Year resolution, lose a stone, then all the rest will follow. Obesity is a mental state, a disease brought on by boredom and disappointment. Greed, like the love of comfort, is a kind of fear. The one way to get thin is to reestablish a purpose in life. Thus, a good writer must be in training. If he is a stone too heavy, then that 14 pounds represents for him so much extra indulgence, so much clogging laziness, in fact, a coarsening of sensibility. There are two ways to be a good writer, like Homer, Shakespeare, or Goethe, to accept life completely, or like Pascal, Proust, Leopardi, Baudelaire, to refuse ever to lose sight of its horror. Further considerations on cowardice, sloth, and vanity, vices which do small harm to other people, but which prevent one from doing any good, and which poison and enfeeble all the virtues. Sloth rots the intelligence. Cowardice destroys all power at the source, while vanity inhibits us from facing any fact which might teach us something. It dulls all other sensation. Who among us is not guilty of all three at some point in their lives? Well, definitely me. Virginia Woolf and he had dinner together and apparently immediately took an intense disliking to one another. She called him a baboon and his wife a slut, and it's like the craziest stuff I've heard from Virginia Woolf. The article from The Independent where I discovered that accuses him of being kind of like a spoiled piece of shit, but at the same time, someone who was kind of sent in the world to be written about, as they put it, which is the running theme with all the articles I find about him. Everybody is like, it's this love-hate relationship. I mean, really love-hate. Like they find him so repulsive, and yet they're so attracted to him, and they admit almost with like this like seething disgust that it's like The Unquiet Grave is actually like a really good book, and we really like to read it. It's this one of the strangest books I've ever come across, because it's like it seems insincere, or I'm going to use the fucking P word because everybody's going to call it pretentious. It's so pretentious and self-indulgent and so on and so forth. But he was a really well-read guy, so he knew what he was doing with a lot of this self-pitying like poetry which he writes in it, and all of the these kind of inflated moments of revealing or confessing his self-sabotage and so on and so forth. But he knew what he was doing. But it actually, even though it can seem kind of insincere at first, and it may like push you guys away when you read it, but I wouldn't write it off so quickly, because I think in the end, it is actually sincere, and there's this line of empathy that is established, and that's where all the articles kind of like seem to come to in the end, full circle. Like they just like heap mountains of shit on Connolly, and then they're like, well, it's actually a masterpiece. The journal entries in this book reflect his like manic mood swings, right? Sometimes they're touching and endearing, and other times they're like super nihilistic and like totally like really scathing. That's when the Chiron kind of comes into play. Like, Tam was telling me that's sort of like that was one of the comparisons he used, and I do like Chiron, but I don't take him seriously. I can't take him seriously. Not 100% at least. Sometimes I do. I don't know. Depends. Like this, for example, you'll see. We are in fact within sight of achieving a world neurosis, a world in which atrophy of the instincts, except that of herd slaughter, abuse of the intellect, and perversion of the heart will obliterate our knowledge of the purpose of life. Humanity will choke in its own bile. Fuck. Bad day, right? It's a bad day in the journal entry. I'm actually surprised that it's not darker in a lot of cases, because this was World War II. I think I might get this wrong, but I think it was like 42 or 43, and I think when he was writing this, and I think it was published in 44. There are pieces which remind me a lot of the fragmentary journal book. It's kind of an experiment, Guilty by Bataille. If any of you guys have read that, that's a magnificent book. But it's really disjointed and strange, and strange even for Georges Bataille. I mean, like the manifestations of inner turmoil during wartime, and I don't know how to describe it properly. It's a hell of a book, but I see some similarities. Although this Connolly's is much more coherent. Guilty is sort of like this evisceration. Everything is kind of like displayed and open. But not always comprehensible. Often not comprehensible. This is a book about reflection, about taking a hard look at yourself. But it's consciously aware of its self-pity and its wallowing. It just doesn't quite know how to pull itself out of that swamp. Much like the moments you and I will find ourselves in throughout our life. I'm 28, and there were things I sought to accomplish by this age that I failed at. There were things that Cyril Connolly sought to accomplish by the age of 40 that he failed at. Approaching 40, a singular dream in which I almost grasped the meaning and understood the nature of what it is that wastes in wasted time. Present pleasure kills time. It's like sleep, a harmless anesthetic. Harmless when once we have recognized that our life is so painful as to need what otherwise would distill both guilt and remorse. If, however, we understand that the love of pleasure can be increased or decreased according to need, then as the pleasure fades into the past, it will leave behind only a sense of nostalgia. And this nostalgia can be converted into art. And once so converted, all trace of guilt is washed away. And this next line I thought was really, really beautiful. Art is memory. Memory is reenacted desire. I'm going to meditate on that one. In this book, he collects and weaves the thoughts and ideas of authors, of philosophers, and poets in the process of forming his own thoughts and opinions. It's like kind of like he's finding what he believes through them, and you can kind of like see the process of his thought with lines of others that he admires and is not afraid to admit he clearly, truly loves literature and these authors that he really has. There's the reverence for all of these thinkers and authors and poets is like bleeding from the page. I mean, it's quite obvious. But this is the interesting thing. Here I am interacting with his writings, which are interacting with their writings. And now you are interacting with my recording with others simultaneously around the globe. And never could you have a better demonstration of this human dialogue, this I don't know, history, this string, this web, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of a trip once you sit and think about it. It's a beautiful thing. And again, Connolly is an interesting guy because here I am, talking about him, reviewing his book, yet in the traditional manner, he wasn't a success at all by his own terms. In fact, this article I found in The Guardian sums it up nicely. This may seem harsh, but while almost everything Connolly wrote was stylish and intelligent, informed and passionate, there is no one book or sequence of writings that can hold up as unequivocally excellent or fully achieved. The famous parodies are clever, but finally lightweight and ephemeral. The millions of words of literary criticism and journalism suffer from the built-in obsolescence that undermines all journalism. However, fine. Enemies of Promise, that precocious memoir, is good, but patchy. That was another book he wrote. The Unquiet Grave is maddeningly flawed, pretentious, self-serving, as well as achingly honest and true. Very curious. The Rock Pool, Connolly's one novel, is an interesting failure, and so on. Yet the sum of his uneven parts add up to something formidable. He's a writer for all seasons, for all readers. Waugh, Evelyn, sneered at his amateur psychoanalyzing. We love only once, Connolly wrote, and on how that first great love affair shapes itself depends the pattern of our lives. Nonsense, Waugh mocked in the margin, but there was never a truer comment made about his own life and situation, and perhaps it pained him to see Connolly hitting a personal nail so squarely on the head. And that's kind of like everyone is calling him a failure, including himself, and yet as far as what authors strive to achieve, he's absolutely doing. He's succeeding. He's succeeded. He's certainly made himself immortal, at least to some degree, right? It's really, really funny because every article, I kind of came to these conclusions, not as eloquently as these articles, but it was essentially the same. I reached the same conclusions. I was like, he sort of, he definitely succeeded, even though he's through claiming he's failed. So he's reached people in the most fascinating way because he's sharing their failure to have created something up to their standards. That's the book's major strength. It makes that connection with the reader and with aspiring authors, because it's like we've all been in that place. We've all had to deal with that type of neurotic insecurity and failure. And I would even wager that it's kind of the same for people who have achieved something great in the literary world, or who have written a book that achieved great success and was now considered part of the canon. Like, it still doesn't change, I mean, I bet that was the Hemingway. I bet that was the Hemingway connection, because even if you've done something magnificent or considered magnificent, you start kind of all over again. You have to keep proving you're a genius or whatever. And I don't know. It's what was that thing by Tennessee Williams? What was it? The Catastrophe of Success. You guys ought to read that. I should just review that. It's very short, but let me know if you want me to review The Catastrophe of Success, because it's great. Again, this is from that article that I'm going to link to in the description box from the book Essayism by Brad Dillon. But is it really so unlikely that the most experimental and self-revealing of mid-century English essays was written by a figure we've learned to think of as cosseted, pretentious, witty but middle brow? A writer out of time with a fetish for his own failure? An adept and addict of minor modes? I think not. The Unquiet Grave is a lesson, 73 years old this year, in the potential still of an elegant, unruly form. It is a masterpiece despite all, and Palinurus, our essayistic contemporary. He really kicks him to shit in the whole article before this, but he ends there, saying that yeah, it's still a masterpiece, and I'm inclined to agree. It's a quick, entertaining. There's so much in the book that I mean, because all of these lines from these wonderful authors like Flaubert or Chamfort or Spinoza or Pascal, that there's so much you could talk about, right? But I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to leave it yeah. So if you are struggling in creating your masterpiece, if you're struggling in creating that thing that is going to, make your life meaningful, that you'll be remembered for, that will help everyone and kind of illuminate these what is unique and profound about you, but you're failing and you're struggling on making the decision whether or not to keep going. Why should you create if you're a failure? And this is what Connolly says: the reward of art is not fame or success, but intoxication. That is why so many bad artists are unable to give it up. And I thought that's as true as anything, Or it's the truest answer I've come across as to why you should keep going in whatever capacity you can. And that's where I'm going to leave you. Always remember what Mark Sandman said: do not go quietly onto your grave. And then the Barry sax kicks in. Ba-na-na-na-na-na. That was probably out of key, and that's about all I've got for you guys today. If you would like to help support the show, if you enjoyed this review and others that I've done, you can help out by going to patreon.com/books are better than food. And for those of you who donate $5 or more, I'm going to start doing this thing where I give, these 2 book choices, and you're going to help me decide what to read and review next. So I'll put up these books, and you guys can vote in the comments section, and I'll respond, and whatever comes out winning, then that's the direction I'm going to go in. And I think that'd be awesome. And let me know if there's any Patreon rewards that you would find valuable that I'm capable of providing. That would be a good incentive for you to help keep the show going, because this is entirely fan funded. This is just, it's just me. It's just me doing this thing, and it's almost doubled in 1 year. The subscription count has almost doubled in 1 year, and I'm very proud of that. But more so, I'm just, if you donate on Patreon, we can have Skype coffee. And lately, I've been meeting some of the fans, and you guys are just I'm consistently amazed how cool the people are who watch the show. And I'm not saying that maybe that sounds a little pompous or some shit, or I'm trying to flatter you guys, but no, I'm actually really interested. You guys, I have new friends from just fans of the show, and they're smarter than me and they're cooler than me. It's that's rad. I don't know. That's just the beautiful thing about the internet. So. Always remember, life is far too short to read bullshit. Call your mom, tell her you love her. Hope you guys are doing well. Great stuff coming. Thinking about doing some poetry. So, yeah, all right. And since Cyril Connolly was a book reviewer himself, I'm sure some of you guys would like some recommendations from him. You can check the description box with this article I found listing out some of them. There's 100, so have at it. And I'm sure many of the authors in that list make their appearance in The Unquiet Grave. So, supplementary reading material. There you go. If you plan to go read it, please hit the like button. Thumbs up. Helps me out a bunch. Likes on Facebook are great too. On Twitter, Instagram, any of that good stuff. I really appreciate it. Hope everybody's doing well. Take care and have a great night. See you next time. Ciao.